On a cold autumn day in 1731, a fire broke out in Ashburnham House in London. The building housed the priceless collection of manuscripts belonging to Sir Robert Cotton. People rushed to save the books. One man, Dr. Bentley, the king's librarian, was seen escaping in his nightgown, a single precious manuscript under his arm. Amid the chaos, a small, unassuming volume was tossed from a window. It was scorched and water damaged, but it survived. That volume, now known as Cotton Nero AX, contained 4 poems written by a single, anonymous author from the 14th century. One of them was Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. For centuries, this poem was mostly an academic curiosity. It tells the story of a knight who accepts a bizarre Christmas challenge from a giant green man. A year later, Gawain must journey to find this Green Knight and receive a return blow from an axe. His journey is not about fighting monsters, it is about keeping his word. Along the way, he is tested. He is offered temptations in a remote castle. He must choose between his honor, his courtesy, and his own life. This structure, a quest that is actually a test of inner virtue, became a blueprint. It is the story of a hero who wins not by being the strongest, but by being the best version of themselves. We see it in countless films today. A character is sent on a mission, but the real mission is the one that happens inside them. They have to face their own fears, their own weaknesses. The journey to the Green Chapel is the journey into the self. The story that nearly burned in a London fire over 280 years ago is still being told, just with different names and different faces. Number 10, a small defeat becomes a founding myth. The battle happened on August 15th, 778. It was not a major engagement. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, was returning from a campaign in Spain. His army was moving through a narrow pass in the Pyrenees Mountains called Ronchevaux. As the rear guard, led by a count named Roland, made its way through, they were ambushed. The attackers were not a Grand Saracen army, as the legend would later claim. They were local Basque fighters, likely angered by the Franks sacking their city of Pamplona on the way out. They knew the terrain. The Franks, with their heavy armor, were at a disadvantage. It was a swift, brutal attack. The rear guard was wiped out. Roland was killed. For Charlemagne, it was a frustrating but minor setback in a long and successful reign. His biographer, a scholar named Einhard, mentions it almost as a footnote. He wrote that the Basque attacked, killed a few nobles, including Roland, looted the baggage train, and then vanished back into the mountains. That was it. That was the reality. But that is not how stories work. Over the next 300 years, that small, bloody affair in a mountain pass grew. It was told and retold by minstrels and poets. The Basques were replaced by a vast Muslim army of 400,000 men. And Roland was no longer just a count. He was Charlemagne's nephew, the greatest knight in France. The ambush became a story of betrayal. The minor defeat became a glorious last stand. This new version was written down around the year 1100 in an epic poem called the Song of Roland. In the poem, Roland and his small force are betrayed by a Frankish nobleman. They are surrounded. Roland's friend, Oliver, begs him to blow his oliphant, a horn made from an elephant's tusk, to call Charlemagne's main army for help. Roland, full of pride, refuses. He believes they can win on their own. They fight with incredible bravery, but they are overwhelmed. Only when it is too late, when his men are all dead or dying, does Roland finally blow the horn. He blows it so hard he bursts his own temples. Charlemagne hears it from miles away and turns his army around, but arrives only in time to see the aftermath and seek revenge. Roland's death is not a failure. It is a sacrifice. He dies for his king, his country, and his faith. He becomes a martyr. The poem turned a tactical blunder into a foundational story for France. It defined courage, loyalty, and sacrifice for generations. In 2016, the film Rogue One, a Star Wars story, did something very similar. The movie is a prequel telling the story of the people who stole the Death Star plans just before the original 1977 film A New Hope. We already know how it ends. We know the plans get to Princess Leia, but we never knew the cost. The film introduces a small, desperate team of rebels. Jyn Erso, the daughter of the Death Star's lead engineer, Cassian Andor, a cynical intelligence officer. A blind monk, a freelance assassin, a defecting pilot, they are not the famous heroes like Luke Skywalker or Han Solo. They are ordinary people who make a choice. They decide to go on an impossible mission to the planet Scarif to steal the schematics. They know it is a suicide mission. There is no escape plan. Like Roland at Roncesvalles Pass, they are cut off and surrounded. Their communication with the main rebel fleet is severed. They are on their own, facing the overwhelming power of the Empire. The final act of the movie is a long, brutal battle. One by one, the heroes fall. They die holding a position, transmitting a file, flipping a switch. Jin and Cassian manage to broadcast the plans to the rebel command ship just as the Death Star fires on the base. They die on a beach, consumed by the weapon they fought to expose. Their last stand is a victory, but a victory no one on their team lives to see. They are the footnote in the larger story of the Galactic Civil War, but the film makes their story the main event. It takes a small, previously unknown action and turns it into a founding myth for the Rebel Alliance. It shows that the great victories we celebrate are built on the anonymous sacrifices of others. Both Song of Roland and Rogue One use the same structure. They tell the story of a doomed last stand. They transform a military loss into a profound moral victory. Roland's pride and Jin's cynicism are washed away by a final act of selfless sacrifice. They created a legend that was more powerful than the truth. Number 9. The Journey to Hell is the production itself. In the spring of 1976, director Francis Ford Coppola went to the Philippines to shoot a film. He had a budget around $13 million and a schedule of 14 weeks. The film was Apocalypse Now, a story about the Vietnam War. It followed a U.S. Army captain sent up a river into Cambodia to assassinate a rogue Green Beret colonel who had set himself up as a god among a local tribe. The story was loosely based on Joseph Conrad's novel Heart of Darkness. Coppola thought it would be a straightforward, if difficult, shoot. He was wrong. The production became its own kind of hell, a journey into madness that mirrored the film's plot. The Philippines in 1976 was under the martial law of Ferdinand Marcos. Coppola had to borrow helicopters from the Philippine military for his big combat scenes. Sometimes, in the middle of a shot, the pilots would get a call and have to fly off to fight actual rebels in the south. Then they would return the helicopters, still smoking, to the film set. The problems kept mounting. In May, a massive Typhoon Olga, tore through the country and completely destroyed the film's expensive sets. Production had to shut down for months. The lead actor, Harvey Keitel, was fired a few weeks into filming and replaced by Martin Sheen, who had to reshoot all of Keitel's scenes. The stress took a toll on everyone. In March 1977, Martin Sheen, only 36 years old, had a massive heart attack. He had to crawl a quarter of a mile to find help. Coppola, fearing his financial backers would pull the plug if they found out, told everyone Sheen was suffering from heat exhaustion. The final actor for the rogue colonel, Marlon Brando, showed up on set massively overweight and having not read the script or the original novel. Coppola had to spend weeks coaxing a performance out of him, improvising scenes and shooting him in the shadows to hide his size. The budget ballooned from $13 million to over $30 million. The 14-week shoot stretched to 238 days of principal photography. Coppola was financing much of the overage himself, mortgaging his home and his winery. He was on the edge of personal and financial ruin. The making of the film became a descent into a real-world heart of darkness. This idea of a literal journey into a hellish underworld is an ancient narrative structure. One of its most powerful expressions comes from the early 14th century in Dante Alighieri's epic poem, The Divine Comedy. The first and most famous part is the Inferno. In the poem, Dante, lost in a dark wood on the night of Good Friday in the year 1300, is guided by the Roman poet Virgil on a journey through the 9 circles of hell. Each circle contains sinners being punished in a way that fits their earthly crimes. The lustful are blown about by a constant storm. The gluttons lie in a vile, freezing slush. The wrathful fight each other endlessly in a swamp. As Dante goes deeper, the sins and the punishments become worse. He sees hypocrites forced to wear heavy cloaks of lead, and thieves who are bitten by snakes and transformed into monstrous shapes. At the very bottom, in a frozen lake, is Lucifer himself, chewing on the 3 greatest traitors in history, Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. Dante's journey is not just a tour of damnation, it is a journey of understanding. He has to confront the nature of sin, both in the world and in himself, to be able to ascend to purgatory and then paradise. The landscape of hell is a reflection of the human soul's capacity for corruption. The descent is necessary for salvation. Coppola's film follows this structure almost perfectly. Captain Willard's journey up the Nung River is a trip through the 9 circles of the Vietnam War. Each stop along the river reveals a new layer of madness and moral decay. He encounters a cavalier surfing colonel who attacks a village so his men can catch a good wave. He sees a chaotic USO show with Playboy playmates that descends into a riot. He finds a U.S. outpost on the Cambodian border in a state of perpetual lawless battle with no commanding officer and soldiers high on drugs. The further he goes, the more the rules of civilization fall away. The river itself becomes a slow descent into a primal state. The final destination, Colonel Kurtz's compound, is the frozen lake at the center of hell. Here, Kurtz, like Dante's Lucifer, has become the ultimate embodiment of the war's corrupting influence. He has abandoned all morality and rules with brutal, terrifying logic. He is a man who has gone all the way. For Willard to complete his mission, he has to confront Kurtz, and in doing so, he has to confront the same darkness within himself. The production of Apocalypse now became a real life version of the Inferno. Coppola and his crew had to travel through their own hell of typhoons, heart attacks, and creative chaos to create their art. The film that emerged is a powerful story of a descent into the underworld, made all the more potent because its creators had to make that same journey themselves. Number 8, The Wise Old Man, was written by a criminal knight. In the summer of 1469, Sir Thomas Malory was in a prison in London. It was not his first time behind bars. Over the previous 2 decades, Malory, a knight and a member of Parliament, had been accused of a shocking list of crimes. The charges included cattle raiding, extortion, robbery, and even attempting to ambush the Duke of Buckingham. He had escaped from prison twice, once by swimming across a moat. We do not know for sure if he was guilty of all these things. The charges might have been politically motivated, part of the brutal civil war known as the Wars of the Roses that was tearing England apart. But whether he was a hardened criminal or a victim of his enemies, Malory spent much of his later life locked away. It was in prison that he wrote his masterpiece, La Morte d'Arthur, The Death of Arthur. He took the sprawling, contradictory legends about King Arthur and his knights, which existed in dozens of French and English poems, and compiled them into a single, epic work of prose. It was one of the first and most important books printed in England, published by William Caxton in 1485, 14 years after Malory died. From his cell, this violent, chaotic man created one of the most enduring figures of wisdom and guidance in all of literature, the wizard Merlin. Malory's Merlin is not just a magician. He is a planner, a kingmaker, a strategist. He orchestrates Arthur's birth and his rise to the throne. He places the sword in the stone to prove Arthur's lineage. He establishes the Round Table. He warns Arthur of future betrayals and dangers. Merlin sees the big picture. He understands that the kingdom needs more than just a strong warrior. It needs a symbol, a just king who can unite the land. He is the mentor who guides the young hero, preparing him for his destiny, but he is also a flawed and tragic figure. Despite his ability to see the future, he is ultimately enchanted and imprisoned in a cave or a tree by Nimue, one of the ladies of the lake, with whom he has fallen in love. His wisdom is immense, but it cannot save him from his own human desires. This character, the all-knowing guide who is both powerful and vulnerable, became a fundamental part of the hero's story. Well, he is the one who gives the hero the tools and knowledge they need to succeed, but who cannot complete the journey for them. In 1977, George Lucas created a new version of Merlin for a new generation. His name was Obi-Wan Kenobi. When we first meet him in Star Wars, he is an old hermit living in the deserts of Tatooine. But like Merlin, he is much more than he appears. He is a Jedi Knight, a guardian of peace and justice from a bygone era. He sees the potential in a young farm boy, Luke Skywalker, and begins to mentor him. He gives Luke his father's lightsaber, the symbolic sword of a knight. He teaches him about the Force, a mystical energy field that is the source of a Jedi's power. He guides Luke on the first steps of his journey, leading him off his home planet and into the wider galaxy. Just like Merlin, Obi-Wan is the wise old man who understands the larger conflict and the hero's role in it. And just like Merlin, his time as a physical guide is limited. On the Death Star, he confronts his former apprentice, Darth Vader. He sacrifices himself, allowing his body to be struck down so that Luke and his friends can escape. But his mentorship does not end with his death. He becomes a Force ghost, a disembodied voice and spirit who continues to guide Luke from beyond the grave. He tells Luke to go to the Dagobah system to find another Master Yoda. He offers advice and encouragement at crucial moments. Lucas took the template that the imprisoned knight Sir Thomas Malory had perfected and launched it into space. The mysterious mentor who appears provides the hero with a weapon and a moral compass, and then disappears, leaving the hero to face their destiny alone, is a direct echo of the relationship between Merlin and Arthur. A man accused of robbery and violence created a perfect model of wisdom and restraint that storytellers still use today. Number 7, the real test is always about a choice. Sometime in the late 14th century, a poet sat down to write. We do not know his name. We call him the Gawain poet, or the Pearl poet. He lived somewhere in the English Midlands, and he wrote in a dialect that was already starting to sound old-fashioned. He was part of a movement called the alliterative revival, a last flowering of the old Anglo-Saxon style of poetry before the language changed for good. This was a world obsessed with the idea of chivalry. Knights were supposed to be perfect, they were supposed to be brave, in battle, courteous in the hall, loyal to their lord, and pious before God. But the poet knew it was not that simple. He knew that these virtues could sometimes contradict each other. What happens when being courteous to a lady conflicts with being loyal to her husband? What happens when a promise you made forces you to face certain death? He explored this conflict in his poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The poem is a masterpiece of psychological tension disguised as a fantasy adventure. The real monsters in the story are not giants or dragons. The real monsters are doubt, fear, and the temptation to take the easy way out. The story begins at a New Year's feast at Camelot. A huge green-skinned knight on a green horse rides into the hall. He proposes a beheading game. Any knight can take a swing at him with an axe. In exchange, that knight must travel to the Green Chapel in 1 year and 1 day to receive a similar blow in return. Arthur's nephew, Sir Gawain, accepts the challenge and cuts off the Green Knight's head. The knight calmly picks up his own head, tells Gawain to seek him out, and rides away. A year later, Gawain sets off on his quest. The journey is hard, but the real test begins when he finds a magnificent castle in the wilderness. The lord of the castle, Bertilac, welcomes him. For 3 days, while the lord goes hunting, Gawain stays behind with the lord's beautiful wife. She comes to his bedroom each morning and tries to seduce him. This is Gawain's true test. He is caught in a trap. Chivalry demands he be courteous to the lady, but his honor demands he not betray his host. He has to walk a fine line, politely deflecting her advances without insulting her. On the 3rd day, she offers him a green silk girdle that she claims will protect him from any harm. They're afraid of his coming appointment with the Green Knight's axe. Gawain accepts the girdle and promises not to tell her husband. This is his one failure. He chooses self-preservation over perfect honesty. When he meets the Green Knight at the chapel, the knight fakes 2 blows and on the 3rd just nicks Gawain's neck. He then reveals that he is Lord Bertilac, and the whole thing was a magical test orchestrated by Morgan Le Fay. The nick on his neck was his punishment for hiding the girdle. Gawain is ashamed, but the Green Knight laughs and praises him. He passed the test, not by being perfect, but by being human. In 2008, Christopher Nolan's film The Dark Knight presented its hero with a series of similar, impossible tests. The film is not about Batman's physical strength. It is about his moral and psychological limits. The villain, the Joker, is not trying to get rich or gain power. He wants to prove a point. He wants to prove that everyone, even Gotham's White Knight hero, is corruptible. He believes that deep down, people are selfish and ugly, and that civilization is just a thin veneer. He sets up a series of diabolical games or tests to prove his theory. He forces Batman to choose between saving his childhood friend, Rachel Dawes, and the city's idealistic district attorney, Harvey Dent. Batman chooses Rachel, but, the Joker has lied and switched their locations. Batman ends up saving Harvey, who is horribly disfigured, and Rachel dies. The test reveals the limits of Batman's power and results in tragedy. The Joker's ultimate test is a social experiment. He places bombs on 2 ferries, leaving Gotham, one filled with ordinary citizens and one with convicted felons. He gives the detonator for each boat to the people on the other boat. He tells them that if one boat blows up the other before midnight, its passengers will be saved. He is trying to force them into an impossible choice, to make them sacrifice others to save themselves. He wants to prove that when the chips are down, everyone is a monster, but they refuse. The citizens cannot bring themselves to do it, and a prisoner on the other boat throws the detonator out the window. The Joker's test fails. People chose to retain their humanity even in the face of death. This is the same core idea as in Sir Gawain. The hero is defined not by winning a fight, but by the choices they make under extreme pressure. The Joker is a twisted version of Lord Bertilock, a master of ceremonies, staging a game to reveal his opponent's true nature. Both stories understand that the most compelling conflicts are not fought with swords or fists, but within the hero's own soul. Number 6, a warrior's promise is proven by a buried treasure. In the summer of 1939, on country estate in Suffolk, England, a woman named Edith Pretty decided to investigate a series of large earthen mounds on her property. She was a wealthy widow with an interest in spiritualism and archaeology. She hired a local, self-taught archaeologist named Basil Brown to do the digging. Working carefully through that summer, with the threat of war looming over Europe, Brown and his team uncovered something extraordinary under the largest mound. It was the imprint of a massive 90-foot-long ship. The wood had long since rotted away in the acidic soil, but the iron rivets remained, holding the ghost shape of the vessel in the sand. At the center of the ship, they found a collapsed burial chamber. Inside was one of the richest treasures ever found in Britain. There was a stunningly intricate gold belt buckle, a purse lid decorated with garnets and glass, silver bowls from the Byzantine Empire, and, most famously, a fearsome iron helmet with a haunting human face. This was the Sutton Hoo ship burial. It was the grave of a powerful Anglo-Saxon king from the early 7th century. The discovery was revolutionary. It provided a stunning, tangible link to the world described in England's oldest epic poem, Beowulf. The poem, written down sometime between the 8th and 11th centuries, describes a world of warrior kings, mead halls, and magnificent treasures. Before Sutton Hoo, some scholars had dismissed the poem's descriptions as poetic fantasy. But here was the proof, buried in the ground. Here was the helmet of a warrior king. Here was the treasure given to loyal followers. The discovery made the world of Beowulf real. A central element of that world is the formal boast, or biat. In the poem, before a warrior undertakes a great challenge, he stands before his lord and his comrades in the mead hall and makes a public promise. It is a vow, a binding contract. When the hero Beowulf arrives in Denmark to fight the monster Grendel, he does not just say he will try his best. He stands up and declares exactly what he will do. He boasts that he has fought sea monsters and giants. Then he vows to fight Grendel with his bare hands, since the monster uses no weapons. This is not just arrogance. It is a way of locking himself into his course of action. He is putting his reputation, his honor, and his life on the line in front of everyone. If he fails after making such a boast, the shame would be unbearable. The boast is a performance of confidence and a promise of future action. Later, before he fights Grendel's mother, he makes another formal speech telling the king what to do with his treasure and his men if he should die. It is a will and a vow combined. The boast and the vow are the engine of the heroic code. A warrior is what he says he will do. In 1986, the film Top Gun took this ancient warrior code and put it inside the cockpit of an F-14 fighter jet. The movie is about elite U.S. Navy pilots training at a prestigious school. The pilots, especially the hero, Maverick, are full of swagger and bravado. Their world is not the mead hall, but the locker room and the officers' club. Their language is not epic poetry, but cocky one-liners. But the underlying structure is the same. The pilots constantly boast about their skills. They argue about who is the best. Maverick's call sign itself is a boast. His rivalry with another pilot, Iceman, is a battle of boasts. They are competing for a trophy, but more importantly, they are competing for the reputation of being the top pilot. Maverick's defining characteristic is his recklessness, his confidence that he can break the rules and succeed where others fail. But his boastful nature leads to tragedy when his best friend and navigator, Goose, is killed in a training accident. Maverick's confidence is shattered. He loses his edge. He is afraid to engage. He can no longer live up to his own boasts. The final act of the film is his test. During a real-world engagement with enemy fighters, he must overcome his fear. He has to live up to the promise of his own reputation. He has to become the hero he always boasted he was. When he successfully saves his fellow pilots, his commander tells him, "You can be my wingman anytime." Iceman, his former rival, concedes, "You can be mine." This is the modern equivalent of the Lord in the mead hall rewarding the warrior who has fulfilled his vow. The world of Top Gun, with its call signs, rivalries, and obsession with being the best, is a direct descendant of the Anglo-Saxon warrior culture found in Beowulf. The Sutton Hoo treasure showed us the physical reality of that world. Films like Top Gun show us that the psychological structures of that world, the need to make a public vow and then live up to it, are still with us. Number 5, a strange plate becomes the ultimate prize. Around the year 1180, a French poet named Chrétien de Troyes was writing at the court of Philip, Count of Flanders. Philip had given Chrétien a book and asked him to turn it into a poem. The result was Perceval, the story of the Grail. It was a new kind of story. It told of a young man, Perceval, raised in isolation in the woods by his mother, who wants to keep him ignorant of the world of knights. But Perceval sees some knights one day and, captivated by their shining armor, sets off to join King Arthur's court. He is naive and foolish, and he makes many mistakes. The most important part of the story comes when he is invited to stay at the castle of the Fisher King. The king is wounded and can only fish for comfort. During a meal, a strange procession passes through the hall. A young man carries a bleeding lance. 2 others carry golden candelabras. Finally, a beautiful young woman enters carrying a grail. Chrétien describes it simply as an ornate, wide, and deep dish made of gold and set with precious jewels. It is so brilliant. It outshines the candles. Perceval, having been told it is impolite to ask too many questions, stays silent. He does not ask what the grail is or whom it serves. He wakes up the next morning to find the castle deserted. Later, he learns that if he had asked the question, the Fisher King would have been healed and his kingdom restored. His failure to ask condemns the land to remain a wasteland. Chrétien de Troyes never finished the poem. He died before he could explain what the Grail was, or if Perceval ever found it again. He left behind a powerful mystery. That mystery was too powerful to be left alone. Over the next few decades, other writers took Chrétien's story and added to it. They gave the Grail a new history. A French poet named Robert de Boron was the first to explicitly connect the Grail to Christianity. He wrote that it was the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper and the same vessel used by Joseph of Arimathea to catch Christ's blood at the crucifixion. Suddenly, the strange, shining dish from Chrétien's poem was transformed. It was no longer just a magical object. It was the holiest relic in Christendom. The quest for the Grail became the ultimate spiritual test for the Knights of the Round Table. Only the purest knight Galahad could achieve it. The structure of the quest narrative was now firmly established. There is a sacred object with magical or spiritual powers. It has been lost. The hero or a group of heroes must go on a long and dangerous journey to find it. The journey is not just a physical one. It is a test of the hero's worthiness. Only the deserving can find the prize. This template, born in the courts of 12th century France, would become one of the most durable in all of storytelling. In 1989, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas released Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The film is a direct, loving homage to this medieval structure. The sacred object is the Holy Grail itself. The film's hero, Indiana Jones, is a modern-day knight. He is an archaeologist, a man who seeks out and protects ancient artifacts. He is not a pure, pious knight like Galahad. He is cynical and often motivated by fortune and glory. But He is a man with a code. He believes artifacts belong in a museum. The film begins when his father, Dr. Henry Jones Sr., a medieval scholar who has been searching for the Grail his entire life, goes missing. Indiana must follow his father's trail, using his Grail diary as a guide. The quest takes him from Venice to Austria to the Middle East. He has to solve puzzles, escape traps, and fight enemies who want the Grail for their own evil purposes. The final part of the film is a direct recreation of a Grail Knight's test. To reach the temple where the Grail is hidden, Indy must pass 3 challenges based on clues from his father's diary. He must show humility, spell out the name of God, and take a leap of faith across an invisible chasm. These are not tests of strength, but of wisdom and character. Inside the temple, he finds the Grail Knight, a crusader who has been kept alive for 700 years. He also finds his enemy, who chooses the wrong cup, a gaudy golden chalice, and perishes. Indiana, remembering his father's research, realizes the cup of a carpenter would be a simple, plain wooden cup. He chooses correctly. He uses the Grail to heal his father, who has been mortally wounded, but he is warned that the Grail cannot leave the temple. When his companion tries to take it, the temple collapses. Indiana is forced to let the Grail go, choosing to save his father instead of the prize. The film perfectly captures the essence of the medieval quest. The journey for the object is ultimately a journey of self-discovery and a test of the hero's values. It started with an unfinished poem by a man named Critian, and it continues with a man in a fedora and a leather jacket. Number 4, a good story does not need to start at the beginning. The oldest surviving manuscript of the Song of Roland was copied by a scribe at Oxford, England, around the year 1129. The first line of the poem does not set a scene or introduce a character in a gentle way. It drops you right into the middle of a crisis. King Charles, our great emperor, has been in Spain for 7 full years. That is the opening. There is no preamble. There is no explanation of who Charlemagne is or why he is in Spain. The story starts in medias res, a Latin phrase meaning in the middle of things. The poem assumes you already know the backstory. The narrative begins at a point of high tension. Charlemagne has conquered all of Spain except for the city of Saragossa. Its king, Marsil, is trying to figure out how to save his city. He hatches a deceitful plan to trick Charlemagne into leaving. This decision sets in motion the central tragedy of the poem, the betrayal and massacre of Roland's rearguard at Roncesvalles Pass. By starting so late in the war, the poet focuses all the attention on the crucial events of the betrayal and the battle. The 7 years of war that came before are just context. The real story is the one that is about to happen. This technique of starting in the middle was not new, but medieval epic poets like the author of Roland used it to create a sense of urgency and importance. They were often performing these poems orally to an audience that was already familiar with the characters and the general outline of the story. They did not need to waste time with exposition. They could cut straight to the most dramatic part. It gives the narrative a powerful forward momentum from the very first line. You are immediately caught up in the decisions and actions that will lead to the climax. The backstory is filled in later through dialogue or brief flashbacks, but the story itself moves relentlessly forward. It is a confident way to tell a story, trusting that the audience will keep up. It values action and consequence over a slow chronological build-up. It grabs the listener from the start and does not let go. In 1994, Quentin Tarantino released Pulp Fiction. The film was a sensation in part because of how it played with time. It did not tell its stories in chronological order. The film opens with a scene in a diner where a couple, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny, decide to rob the place. Then it cuts to 2 hitmen, Vincent Vega and Jules Winfield, on their way to a job. We follow Vincent through a series of events, including a date with his boss's wife and a sequence where he accidentally kills someone in a car. Later in the film, we see Vincent Vega get killed, but then in the final section of the movie, he is alive again, back in the diner from the opening scene. We realize that the last part of the film takes place chronologically before other parts we have already seen. And Tarantino takes the idea of in medias res and applies it to the entire structure of his movie. He breaks the story into chapters and shuffles them out of order. He starts not just one scene, but the entire film in the middle of things. The effect is disorienting at first, but it is also brilliant. By scrambling the timeline, Tarantino forces the audience to pay closer attention. We have to piece the story together like a puzzle. It also changes the meaning of the events. Knowing that Vincent will later be killed makes his philosophical conversation with Jules in the diner more poignant. It adds a sense of fate and consequence to what might otherwise seem like random events. The nonlinear structure highlights themes of chance, choice, and redemption. The final scene, which is chronologically in the middle of the overall story, shows Jules having a spiritual awakening and choosing to leave his life as a hitman. By ending the film on this moment of decision, Tarantino suggests it is the most important event in the story, even if it is not the last thing that happens. Like the poet of Roland, he understood that the most powerful place to start a story is not always the beginning. He took a technique used by medieval poets to create urgency and expanded it to create a complex modern masterpiece about a web of interconnected lives in the Los Angeles underworld. Number 3, all these small stories are actually one big story. Sometime in the late 12th century, a woman known as Marie de France was writing poetry. We know very little about her. She was probably a noblewoman, possibly an abbess living in England, but, writing in French. She was one of the first and greatest female writers of the medieval period. She is best known for a collection of 12 short narrative poems called The Lias. Each lay is a self-contained story, usually about love, loss, and chivalry. One story, L'Envol, is about a lonely knight who falls in love with a beautiful fairy queen. Another, Yonk, is about an unhappy wife who is visited by a lover in the form of a hawk. Bisque Levrette is about a knight who is also a werewolf, betrayed by his wife. Each story has its own characters, its own setting, its own magical element. On the surface, they are just a collection of separate tales, but when you read them together, you start to see connections. How themes repeat, the nature of love, the conflict between personal desire and social duty, the presence of a mysterious, often dangerous supernatural world. These ideas echo from one lay to the next. The stories are all set in the same vague, Arthurian world of knights and ladies. They create a cumulative effect. Marie de France was using a technique called interlacing or polyphonic narrative. She was weaving together multiple separate plot lines to create a larger, richer tapestry. While each story can stand on its own, their true power comes from their combination. They build on each other, creating a complex emotional landscape of courtly life. The joy of one story is tempered by the sorrow of the next. It is a way of looking at a single theme, love, from a dozen different angles. It suggests that life is not one single, linear story, but a collection of many stories happening at once, overlapping and intersecting in unexpected ways. This structure was later used on a massive scale in the great prose romances like the Vulgate cycle, where the adventures of Lancelot, Galahad, and other knights are all told in parallel, with the narrative cutting from one quest to another. In 2003, the writer and director Richard Curtis released the film Love Actually. The film follows the lives of more than a dozen characters in London in the weeks leading up to Christmas. There is the new Prime Minister who falls for a member of his staff. There is a writer who goes to France to heal a broken heart and falls for his Portuguese housekeeper. There is a married man who is tempted by his attractive new secretary. There is a young boy who is in love with his American classmate. There is a washed-up rock star trying to make a comeback with a Christmas song. The film cuts constantly between these different stories. For the first part of the movie, the connections between the characters are not always clear. A character who is the protagonist of one story might be a minor background figure in another. The man tempted by his secretary is the brother of the Prime Minister's staffer. The writer's housekeeper has a sister who works with the tempted husband. Slowly, you realize that all these people are part of the same interconnected world. Richard Curtis used the same interlacing structure that Marie de France and the Romance writers had perfected. He tells multiple separate love stories simultaneously. Each story explores a different aspect of love: new love, forbidden love, unrequited love, grieving love, familial love. By weaving them together, the film creates a single, powerful statement. The opening and closing scenes set at the arrivals gate at Heathrow Airport make the theme explicit. The narrator says that whenever he gets gloomy about the state of the world, he thinks about the airport, where you see people from all walks of life greeting their loved ones. Love, the film argues, is actually all around. This message would not be nearly as effective if the film told only one of the stories. By showing us 10 different stories at once, all building to their own small climaxes on Christmas Eve, Curtis makes his point on a grand scale. Like the Lays of Marie de France, the whole becomes much greater than the sum of its parts. It is a medieval narrative technique used to create one of the most beloved modern romantic comedies. Number 2, the end is in the beginning. The story of the Beowulf manuscript is one of fire and water. It is a single handwritten volume from around the year 1000, known as the Noel Codex. 4 centuries, it sat in the library of Sir Robert Cotton, along with the manuscript of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. In 1731, it was also caught in the fire at Ashburnham House. The codex was saved, but it was badly burned around the edges. The pages became brittle. Over the next 100 years, the damaged edges crumbled away, and parts of the poem were lost forever. The poem itself, the story of a great hero fighting monsters, seems to be built on a similar idea of structure and decay. It is a story framed by death. The poem begins not with the hero Beowulf, but with the funeral of a great Danish king, Sildseefing. He was an orphan who became a mighty ruler. When he dies, his people place his body in a ship, surround it with treasure, and push it out to sea, back to the unknown place from which he came. This powerful opening sets the tone for the entire poem. It is a story about a heroic society, but one that is always aware of its own mortality. The glory of the ring, giving a king, is temporary. The mead hall will eventually fall. The story then moves forward 50 years. We see Beowulf, now an old king in his own land, fight his final battle against a dragon. He kills the dragon, but he is mortally wounded. The poem ends with Beowulf's funeral. His people build a huge pyre, burn his body, and then bury his ashes and the dragon's treasure in a great barrow overlooking the sea. The structure of the poem is a circle. It begins with the funeral of a great king, and it ends with the funeral of a great king. This is a deliberate literary device known as a ring composition or chiasmus. The narrative starts at a certain point, goes on a long journey, and then returns to the same point at the end, but with a new understanding. The opening funeral of Sildseefing is a moment of order and hope. His reign established a strong dynasty. The closing funeral of Beowulf is a moment of fear and despair. With Beowulf gone, his people, the Geats, are vulnerable and expect to be destroyed by their enemies. The beginning and the end mirror each other, but the reflection is darker. Everything that happens in between Beowulf's fights with Grendel, Grendel's mother, and the dragon is contained within this frame of mortality. The poet is showing that even the greatest heroism cannot stop the cycle of life and death. The structure of the poem reinforces its central theme, the temporary nature of all human achievement in the face of an unforgiving fate. The filmmakers Joel and Ethan Coen used this exact same structure in their 2007 film No Country for Old Men. The film opens with a voiceover from Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, an aging lawman in West Texas in 1980. He talks about the old days and how he is struggling to understand the new kind of violence that is plaguing his county. The opening shots are of the empty, sweeping landscape of the desert. The film ends with another voiceover from a now retired Sheriff Bell. He is sitting at his kitchen table talking to his wife. He tells her about 2 dreams he had. In the second dream, he and his father are riding on horseback through the cold, dark mountains. His father rides ahead of him, carrying fire and a horn, and goes on into the darkness to make a fire in a place where Bell knows he will eventually arrive. And then Bell says, "And then I woke up." That is the end of the film. The story of the main plot, a welder named Llewellyn Moss who finds a case of drug money, and the remorseless killer Anton Chigurh who hunts him for it, is framed by the reflections of Sheriff Bell. Where Bell is the moral center of the story, the old king surveying his decaying kingdom. The violent, chaotic events of the plot are contained within his weary perspective. The opening shows him trying to make sense of the world. The ending shows him accepting that he cannot. The dream about his father carrying the fire ahead suggests a small glimmer of hope, a sense of order and continuation beyond the darkness of the present, much like the funeral of Sildseefing suggests the continuation of a dynasty. But the overall feeling is one of melancholy and resignation. The Coen brothers, like the Beowulf poet, use a ring composition to frame a story of brutal violence within a larger meditation on time, fate, and mortality. The beginning and the end are not about the action. They are about the meaning of the action. They are quiet moments of reflection that hold a storm of violence within them. Number 1, the myth was not discovered, it was cataloged. In 1949, a professor of literature at Sarah Lawrence College named Joseph Campbell published a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Evan Campbell had spent his life studying mythology from all over the world. He read the ancient Greek epics, the sacred texts of India, the folk tales of Native Americans, and the medieval romances of Europe. He saw the same patterns repeating everywhere. In his book, he argued that all hero stories from all cultures are fundamentally the same story. He called this universal pattern the monomyth, or the hero's journey. He broke it down into 17 stages, though they could be simplified into 3 main acts: departure, initiation, and return. In the departure, the hero is called to an adventure, often refuses at first, but is then encouraged by a mentor figure and crosses a threshold into a special, unknown world. In the initiation, the hero faces a series of trials and temptations, confronts a powerful villain or a godlike figure, and achieves some ultimate boon or reward. In the return, the hero must travel back to the ordinary world and use this reward to help their community. And Campbell did not invent this structure. He identified it. He was a scholar who created a map for a territory that had existed for thousands of years. The medieval epics he studied, like the stories of Arthur, Percival, and Beowulf, were all perfect examples of his monomyth. They were stories of heroes leaving home, venturing into forests and monster lairs, and returning with a new status or a treasure to save their people. For a long time, Campbell's book was mostly read by academics and students of mythology. That changed in the 1970s. A young filmmaker named George Lucas was struggling to write a script for a science fiction fantasy film. Well, he wanted to create a modern myth, but he was having trouble with the story. A friend recommended he read The Hero with 1,000 Faces. For Lucas, it was a revelation. He said it was like a light bulb went off. He realized his story was a classic hero's journey. He consciously used Campbell's 17 stages as a checklist to structure his screenplay for Star Wars. As Luke Skywalker is the hero in the ordinary world, a moisture farm, he receives the call to adventure from a droid. He initially refuses. He meets a mentor figure, Obi-Wan Kenobi. He crosses the threshold into the special world, the Mos Eisley Cantina, and the journey into space. He faces trials, the trash compactor. He confronts the ultimate evil, the Death Star. He achieves the boon, the destruction of the Death Star, and the rescue of the princess. He returns home a hero. Lucas took the ancient blueprint that Campbell had cataloged and used it to build his new mythology. Star Wars became one of the most successful and beloved films of all time, largely because its underlying structure was so familiar and so powerful. It was a medieval romance with spaceships instead of horses. In 1999, 2 filmmakers, the Wachowskis, used the exact same blueprint to create a myth for the digital age. Their film was The Matrix. The hero, Thomas Anderson, is living a boring, ordinary life as a computer programmer. He feels that something is wrong with the world. He receives a mysterious call to adventure on his computer screen, Follow the White Rabbit. He initially refuses to climb out on a ledge to escape his captors. He meets a mentor figure, Morpheus, who offers him a choice between a red pill, the truth, and a blue pill, continued ignorance. He takes the red pill and crosses the threshold into the special world, the reality that his entire life has been a computer simulation, and he has been living in a dream. The initiation phase is his training. He learns kung fu, how to bend the rules of the Matrix, and that he is the one, a prophesied hero. He faces a series of trials, culminating in a confrontation with the powerful villain, Agent Smith. He dies and is resurrected by the love of his companion, Trinity, achieving the ultimate boon, full control over the Matrix. In the return, he makes a phone call to the machines from inside the Matrix, promising to show the people still trapped inside a world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries, a world where anything is possible. He is now the master of both worlds, ready to bring his gift of freedom back to humanity. The story of The Matrix is a near-perfect execution of Joseph Campbell's monomyth. It is the same journey that countless medieval knights took. The dark forests and enchanted castles have been replaced by green computer code and sterile office buildings, but the stages are identical. The quest is the same. It is the story of a person who leaves home, overcomes a great trial, and returns transformed with the power to save their world. Campbell's work gave storytellers a language to talk about these structures, and it proved that the patterns perfected in poems recited around a fire 1,000 years ago are still the most powerful way to tell the story of a hero.